Good evening, and thank you all very much for coming. The United States accomplished many extraordinary things in the Second World War, but D-Day was towards the very top of the list. Now, nothing is more difficult in war than assaulting a fortified beachhead. That's why the Marines do it. But this is Europe in World War II. The Marines are tied up in the Pacific. So it's left to the Army, the Navy, the Army Air Corps, and the Coast Guard. So we're going to find out how they pulled it off. Who else has tried to invade across the English Channel? Well, the Romans did it in 43 AD. They were successful. 1066, of course, William the Conqueror. He did it. Between 1798 and 1802, Napoleon really wanted to do it because England was a thorn in his side, but he could never pull it off. And as early as late as 1940, Adolf Hitler wanted to do Operation Sea Lion, knock England out of the war, but after losing the Battle of Britain, he didn't want to have to deal with the RAF and the Royal Navy, so that all came to naught. Now, at this time, Europe is called Festung Europa, Fortress Europe. Atlantic Wall extends from Denmark to the Spanish border. In summer 42, the Germans make it even stronger. They add 15 divisions. They're building fortifications, coastal guns, pillboxes, mines at sea and on the land. They flood areas that they think paratroopers might want to come into. Now, World War II, the key land weapon is the tank. So the big question is, where do we put our panzer divisions along 2,000 miles of coast? Because we know they're coming. We don't know when and we don't know where. So that's the big dilemma for Germany. Now, why didn't D-Day happen sooner? England's been at war since 1940. We joined in 1941. Well, England remembers Dunkirk. That only happened a couple of years ago. Of course, the Somme in World War I, when hundreds of thousands of British troops died at the hands of the Germans. And the UK is more interested in protecting the sea lanes in the Mediterranean, including the Suez Canal. That's why they get us into North Africa. You'll remember that lecture. We're tied up in the Pacific. We're building armies and armaments and letting the UK really sort of lead the way, take the lead in war planning. Now, who's pressing for an earlier D-Day? Well, the Russians, of course. Germans have been in Russia since 1941, and Russia's been on the brink of defeat. But by 1944, the Russians are actually pushing the Germans back. It's gotten to the point where if we don't invade France, Russia's not only going to conquer Germany, they're going to keep going. So all of Europe is going to belong to Russia. Not something we want. So we need to get into France. Now, the Russians, for years, we didn't come to their aid. But when we said, hey, we're going to do this D-Day thing, and it's going to be really dangerous, and can you help tie up the German forces? The Russians go, sure, be glad to. So when we launch D-Day, they launch Operation Bagration. Simultaneously with our efforts, the forces involved in that operation are far greater than the forces involved in D-Day. When you think about it, in World War II, Russia is a much better ally to us than we are to them. Leadership, US and UK. Of course, FDR and Winston Churchill. Even before Pearl Harbor, Churchill was lobbying FDR to get in the war, or at least supply England with the supplies they need. Churchill is very involved with military matters in England. Churchill is also primarily responsible for pushing D-Day back again and again and again. FDR's in the loop, but he lets his generals and his admirals plan grand strategy and tactics. Churchill actually interferes with the British military, and at one point, Eisenhower is forced to stand up to him. The good news is on D-Day, Churchill and FDR are pretty much out of the loop. Now, Churchill said he was going to be on board British naval vessels during the bombardment of the invasion. And Eisenhower tried to talk him out of it, and he couldn't. The king talked to Churchill and said, Winnie, if you're going to be on a British battleship when the Germans are trying to shoot us, I'll be standing right next to you. That's how Churchill decided not to do it. Dwight D Eisenhower, one of the great men of the 20th century. West Point class in 1915, the class the stars fell on, began World War II as a brigadier general. Now, that's a general, but that's just a one-star. Chief of Staff George Marshall has his eye on Eisenhower. So he starts moving him up, giving him opportunities. Of course, he's the Supreme Allied Commander for Operation Torch. Did a good job. Now, he proved in Torch that he could sort of keep the kids from fighting amongst themselves. Everybody got along under Eisenhower, British and Americans, and even the French, finally, everybody got to work together. So Eisenhower was a natural for the job. His main lieutenants, Montgomery, defeated Rommel at El Alamein. Easy when you have Rommel's entire battle plan, which he did. Montgomery is very cautious. Unlike Eisenhower, he does not play well with others, so he's always kind of a thorn in Eisenhower's side. He's British, he's Eisenhower's deputy, coordinates Allied air power, he's decisive, he's a team player. General Omar Bradley, he was a good guy, solid commander, takes care of his troops, he's in charge of U.S. infantry. Leadership, Nazi Germany, bad guys. Adolf Hitler, #1 bad guy of all time. At this point of the war, Adolf Hitler is the greatest resources the Allies have. He keeps messing up. He's responsible for things like Stalingrad. Germany was doing really well until Hitler decided he had to be a general. Didn't work out very well. He thinks if the Germans can decisively beat the Allies on D-Day, we will never try again, and he can take all the German forces in the West, 45 divisions, move them to Russia, and then he'll win the war. That's what's at stake for Nazi Germany. Hitler boasts, I'm the greatest builder of fortifications of all time. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, he is in charge of German forces in the West. Cannot cover 2,000 miles of coast with tanks. He wants to keep the tank divisions, the panzer divisions in reserve northwest of Paris and send them when the invasion comes. He has no experience fighting against opposing forces that have the quantity and quality of US and UK air power. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox. He's in charge of defending the beaches, but he works for von Rundstedt. He did fight against the US and the UK and had to deal with their air power and realized you can't deal with our air power. That largely led to his defeat in North Africa. Rommel wants to position the panzer divisions at the beaches. So he knows if he can't destroy the invasion on the beaches, if we land our armies, Germany's doomed. German solution defending France. As per Rommel's vision, the German infantry forces are scattered to the beaches. As per Rundstedt's wishes, the panzer divisions are held in reserve away from the beaches. However, the panzer divisions can only be released on Hitler's orders. So this solution is the worst possible solution that could happen. One of the great things about D-Day, for every good decision we made, Germany made 3 bad ones. German intelligence expectations. The area of France called the Port of Calais is right across the English Channel from England. So obviously, that's where the landing's going to be. The Germans are convinced of that. If the landings happen in the Port of Calais, that's also closest to Germany. So if we land in the Port of Calais, less distance across the channel, And once we're there, straight shot into Germany. German leadership is predisposed that we are going to land in the Pot of Calais. Well, what are the Allies' intelligence plans? Because we know the Germans think it's the Pot of Calais, we do everything to convince them they're right. We have a massive disinformation campaign called Operation Bodyguard to help convince the Germans we're going to the Pot of Calais. An entire fictitious American army, the first U.S. Army group, is created and stationed at Kent. Why Kent? Kent is right across the channel from the Pot of Calais. This group is commanded by George Patton. The Germans see him as our best attacking general. Now, Patton is still recovering from slapping soldiers in Italy and Sicily, so, what better use than to put him in charge of a fictitious army? The army has false radio traffic, inflatable tanks, fake track marks, dummy aircraft, fake landing craft on the coast. Even when backup troops arrive in England, put them in the fictitious army for the Germans to see, marching around. This ruse helps the Germans continue to believe it's the Pot of Calais. An example of tanks belonging to the fictitious army. Story of Garbo, the Spanish spy. I didn't even put down anything for you to read because I know the story, I just wanted to share it with you. Garbo was a Spanish spy who desperately wanted to be a spy in World War II. Didn't care who he spied for. So the Germans thought he was spying for them, but he's spying for us. And the Germans really think he's their best spy. We help convince them of this because we feed him true information that won't hurt us. You know, if we're going to bomb some silly place on Thursday and, we let them know, but, it's out of range of their fighters or whatever. So it's like, wow, Garbo's really coming through for us. He's telling us the truth again and again and again. Well, we're setting Garbo up for the ultimate ruse. Very early on the morning of D-Day, Garbo contacts the Germans, and he says, the Allies are coming. They're invading Normandy. Well, Germans can look out with their binoculars and see, oh, there's 5,000 ships out there. I think the Allies are coming. So once again, Garbo's come through. But he doesn't stop there. He tells the Germans, it's a ruse. They want you to think they're going to Normandy, but they're really going to the Pot of Calais. So once again, making the Germans believe what they want to believe. Now, of course, when we never showed up at the Pot of Calais, his days as a spy were over, but who cares? Because he immobilized German panzer divisions in the vicinity of the Pot of Calais because he helped convince the Germans that's where the attack is coming. 8th Air Force bombing campaign. 2 months before D-Day, Ike wants to choose the targets for the 8th Air Force to hit to disrupt transportation infrastructure to hinder German ability to reinforce the beaches. Churchill says, no way, because we're going to wind up killing Frenchmen. And the French are going to hate us, and he's got to live with the French after the war, and they may not let us go to Paris. Ike finally gets to the point where he threatens to resign if this isn't going to happen. So who do we bring in but Charles de Gaulle? And we say, General, if we have a bombing campaign to help us invade France and kick the Germans out of there, even if we lose a few Frenchmen along the way, is that okay? And de Gaulle's like, heck yeah. So the campaign takes place, and of course we're bombing lots of targets in France, but guess where we drop most of our bombs? If you said the Pot of Calais, again, this whole campaign, disinformation. I was going to say fake, but it wasn't fake news. Air Force. Trouble was, well, Did I put that one in the right spot? I may not have. We'll get back to that image. We want to assault a port city because we've got so many men, supplies, equipment. It's tough to bring all that onto a beach. But when we conducted the raid at Dieppe, it was a disaster because all the port cities are heavily fortified. So what did we do? This was among the list of things that we just created because we knew we needed them. Mulberry. Concrete platforms that are towed across the channel. Artificial harbors. This is the mulberries. Each of these, that's an individual piece. So the pieces are towed across the English Channel, and then when we get to Normandy, they're connected. And it worked. Artificial harbors. Basic plan of invasion, the airborne. 2 American airborne divisions, the 82nd and the 101st, could be dropped behind enemy lines early in the morning before beach landings. Now, why are we doing that? What's their purpose? Destroy some bridges, capture others, disrupt communications. We know where the Germans have artillery placed. Take out the artillery, because the artillery is going to be firing on the beaches. Prevent German reinforcements from coming to the beaches. Generally disrupt the Germans every which way we can. Eisenhower visits the 101st Airborne just before D-Day, just before these guys are getting on the planes to go get dropped behind enemy lines in France. He visits them intentionally because he's been told these troops are going to suffer 70% casualties. Basic plan of invasion, Rangers. 2nd Ranger Battalion scared, destroyed German heavy artillery. The 5th Ranger Battalion lands on Omaha Beach with the 29th Division to support the landings. Engineers land with the infantry, clear mines and beach obstacles, and then clear pathways through the German barbed wire obstacles, other impediments. Again, create pathways. If we land on the beach, if we got 10,000 guys on a beach, and they're trapped because they can't get through all of the barbed wire and fortifications, everything the Germans have created, they're done for. Basic plan, infantry. Well, this is much more basic. Seize the fortified beaches, take out the German defensive positions, eliminate their resistance, break through the defenses in order to expand the beachhead for reinforcements to get ashore and create a breakout from the beaches. We can't just take the beaches. We land on the beach, but then we've got to get through the German defenses or we're going to be slaughtered. The British come up with what are called Funnies. DD, duplex drive, or Donald Duck Sherman tanks were fitted with a flotation screen that allowed the tanks to float. So when they got out of the landing craft, they would float. They would have 2 propellers fitted that were attached to the tank. They would float, and they would drive through the water. In addition to the tanks, the Funnies were flail tanks that would destroy mines, armored ramps for getting over seawalls, fascine carriers for crossing ditches, and bridging tanks. So the British were great at coming up with all this stuff that we were going to need. Now this is the plan. This is the big overall. Reason I chose this map was it also included the airborne. 1st Airborne, going to be dropped here. Let me start with the beaches. Utah Beach, American. Between Utah and that the Rangers are going to take, a lot of big artillery has been up there. Omaha, American. Gold, British. Juno, Canadian. Sword, British. British Airborne Division, 6th Airborne Division, dropped behind British lines, not too far. Dropped behind Utah. 101st also dropped behind Utah and scattered German resistance along the way. Note the differences or the distances between Utah and Omaha, and between Omaha and Gold. 5,000 American ships, heavy bombers have hit the sites, naval gunfire, a lot of stuff going on. 5 June is the date of the invasion. 5 June comes, weather's horrible. So the troops have already been loaded up. Invasion is underway when it's determined we can't go. In order to invade, we have to have good enough weather and calm enough seas that the seaborne people can go. For the paratroopers, we need just the right moonlight for the paratroopers to function. So we had to cancel June 5th. Now the weather is looking like it's going to be bad for a while. And if we miss this opportunity, we don't get it again for a while. So one of the weather gurus promises Ike, you've got a window of opportunity if you go in on June 6th. So several of his generals are telling Ike, don't do it, don't do it. Ike says, let's go. We're going. Huge benefits of the bad weather. Rommel sees the weather report. He goes home to Germany to visit his family. He's gone. His next in command, General Friedrich Dahlmann, was 100 miles behind the lines with the rest of the German leadership engaged in military war games. We don't need to be at the front. They can't invade. The weather's too bad. So on D-Day, senior German leadership from the landing sites is essentially gone. This is Eisenhower's message to the troops. Spread it over two slides. Just look at the soldiers, sailors, airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force. The Great Crusade, not just another battle, the Great Crusade. Hopes and prayers of liberty-loving people everywhere march with you. The destruction of the German war machine, elimination of Nazi tyranny, freeing the oppressed peoples of the world and providing security for ourselves in a free world. Your enemy is pretty bad news, but the good news is this is 1944. Germany's been losing. Good time for us to go. Then he talks about what has happened to make this doable, make this in the realm of the possible. Air offensive, our weapons and ammunition, great reserves of trained fighting men. The tide has turned. The free men of the world are marching together in victory. And then, just like a dad, I have full confidence in your courage, devotion to duty, and skill in battle. We will accept nothing less than full victory. Good luck, and let us all beseech the blessings of an almighty God upon this great and noble undertaking. So we've been training for 2 years. We all know exactly what we're doing. Plans are in place. Ships are on their way. Tough stuff. Here's the Airborne going in. Airborne Assault, 82nd and 101st. That should be 101st, not 102nd. Airborne fly behind enemy lines in the early hours of D-Day. Due to flak, that's German anti-aircraft fire, weather, and pilot errors. The pilots, when they're getting shot at, don't always follow the course, don't always let the guys out when they're supposed to. If they're supposed to fly another 5 minutes, they sometimes didn't because they're getting shot at. So the airborne troops are scattered all over the place, and they're mixed up so that instead of organized units, squads, platoons, companies, regiments, rallying together to accomplish their objectives, you've got twos and guys by the twos and threes. One of the guys talked about the fact that he got into a fight with one of his fellow paratroopers, and the guy said, I hate you, you son of a gun, I'm going to kill you one of these days. And when he lands, he can't find anybody. And he's going through the countryside, and he hears a click, and he clicks, and it's the guy. And they hugged each other like long-lost brothers and continued the fight. Airborne continued despite casualties, enemy resistance, and commands being mixed. officers and NCOs gather whatever men and equipment they have and go out to accomplish the missions. Blow up bridges, cut communication lines, seize key locations, attack German soldiers. The good news is, because they're spread out all over the place, the Germans think there's a lot more of them than they are. So it actually worked to our advantage in that way. Now, the bombardment assault, the massive bombing by the 8th Air Force heavy and medium bombers on beach strong points does little. In fact, part of the problem was when you're trying to bomb a cliff and you're in a bomber that's so many thousand feet up in the air, that's pretty tough. Plus, they didn't want to hit the troops coming in, so if anything, they erred on the part of bombing later, so behind the German lines was plastered, but the actual guns and everything was not. Now, we had battleships out there, Arkansas, Texas, Nevada, sunk at Pearl Harbor, refloated, plus HMS Ramillies and a French battleship, Lorraine. They unleashed hundreds of 12, 14, and 16-inch shells on German positions, but not for long, and they did know exactly what they were shooting at. First assaults, like in the movie, not according to plan. Higgins boats and other landing craft had a tough time. Rough seas, smoke, mines, obstacles, and German artillery fire. Many of the landing craft were lost or the troops were discharged too far out or in the wrong place. Most of the troops were horribly seasick. General Teddy Roosevelt Jr., President Roosevelt's, Teddy Roosevelt's son, not FDR's, the earlier president, he walked with a cane. He was in his 50s, had a heart condition, had to really lobby to go in with the first wave. Gets to the beach, and they're checking location, you know, taking an azimuth compass and everything, looking at the landmarks, and they said, we're in the wrong place. We're not even close to where we're supposed to be. And Roosevelt said, we'll start the war from right here. Almost all of the floating tanks didn't float because when the seas were even a little bit rough, they swamped. So most of the tanks, not a couple, most of the tanks didn't make it. It's what it looked like from the landing craft. Organized chaos. Can't even imagine. Nothing more complicated, nothing more devastating than a beachhead with an enemy, a determined enemy on the shore, throwing everything they have at you. Success and victory, 4 out of 5 beaches. Utah Beach, even with some difficulties, within 2 hours, they're moving off the beach and they're linking up with the paratroopers who had landed behind enemy lines. Gold Beach, British, despite savage fire from the Germans, the Funnies, all those strange vehicles, they all worked and the troops were soon moving inland. Juno Beach, Canadian, also intense fire, but they had British Funnies too. They were soon off the beaches. Sword Beach, UK, very light resistance. Within hours, linked up with the glider-borne troops at the Caen Canal. So far so good, 4 out of 5. Not so much on Omaha. That's where we really stepped in it. Geography, steep cliffs, German resistance by far the worst at Omaha. The troops begin landing at 0630. Many machine gun before they even get off the landing craft. The depiction in Saving Private Ryan, accurate. Almost all the swimming tanks failed to swim. At Point du Hoc, where the Rangers are going to climb the cliffs, 220 Rangers began the climb. By nightfall, only 80 were left in action. One of the problems was their ropes were so soaked by the surf and the water coming over the boats. Try climbing up a wet rope. That was a real problem for them. At 0830, the guys in the ships, the commanders, they've got their telescopes and binos and they're looking at what's going on, and they said, we can't send anybody else because the beach is so clogged. The guys on the beach are either going to have to win it or not, but we can't even help them. How did we turn that into victory? Small unit leadership, junior NCOs, officers, gathered whatever men and resources, just like the paratroopers, are available and begin to advance through German fire to clear exit ways off the beaches. Saving Private Ryan, Tom Hanks really shows what that was like, just gathering whatever he had. Gets to a point where he's trying to take out a German machine gun. He sends 2 soldiers to try to get into position. They get killed. 2 more, they get killed. 2 more, they get killed. But they kept doing it. They kept going, doing everything they could to destroy Germans and create exit ways off of the beaches. Despite the casualties, lack of tank support, our citizen soldiers prevailed over the veterans. As men and equipment moved off the beaches, Omaha's reinforced. Now, something happened that wasn't anticipated. The destroyers, they're seeing what's going on. Now, they don't have the draft of a battleship, so they can get closer to the beaches. These destroyers got so close, some of them started to beach themselves and had to pull away. But they were running up and down the beaches with all their 5-inch guns firing. And what are they firing at? Well, if I'm on the beach and I'm shooting at a German position, the destroyers can see the impact of my bullets. So they follow that with 5-inch shells. A German observer was on one of the cliffs with binos calling in artillery fire. Hit him with a 5-inch shell. Destroyers fired hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of 5-inch shells. So effective, some of the German troops tried to surrender to the destroyers. They're using semaphores and, we give up, stop sending 5-inch shells. And the destroyers semaphored back, go down to the beaches and surrender. Destroyers are supposed to keep enough ammunition in case the German Navy shows up. They didn't. They fired every single round they had. Now, what happened at Omaha? Bad intel. We thought the defenses were manned by Polish and Russian troops, low morale, and only 1 battalion. It was 3 battalions of crack German troops. Cloud cover caused the bombers to miss their targets. Battleship cruiser bombardment was too brief. And like I said, most of the troops, by the time they got on shore, were seasick and confused. So many tanks sank, there was almost no tank support. One German machine gunner fired 62,000 rounds before he was taken out. Think about that. How many Americans did he get? 1 guy. Now, because of the confused landings, the Americans were bunched up, so the Germans couldn't concentrate their fire. We weren't spread out the way they would have liked. A lot of the American troops that were offloaded too far from shore, and you saw it in the film, I can swim, but you put 100 pounds of equipment on me and put me in water over my head, I'm going to drown. That's what they did. End of the longest day, around 2200, 8 p.m., we stopped unloading the beaches. Around 175,000 Americans, British, and Canadians are ashore. The invasion front covers 90 kilometers. There's gaps, 18 kilometers between Utah and Omaha, 11 between Omaha and Gold, but the Germans are so on the run by this point, they couldn't even exploit that. We endured about 4,900 Allied casualties. Germans spent 4 years and massive manpower and materiel to build the Atlantic Wall. At Utah, the Atlantic Wall held up the U.S. 4th Division for less than an hour. At Gold, Juno, and Sword, the British and Canadians were held up for about an hour. At Omaha, the U.S. 1st and 29th Divisions were held up for less than a day. Think of the resources that the Germans spent on the Atlantic Wall, and think of how quickly we got through it. It really was the German Maginot Line. On D-Day, Hitler slept till midday. They wouldn't wake him up. We can't wake up the Fuhrer. So the panzer divisions couldn't even begin to move towards the beaches. Rommel was right. Allied air power hampered reinforcements. By the time German armor closed with Allied armies, they were too weak, they were too beat up to attack. Specific example, SS Panzer Division Das Reich took 2 weeks to reach the coast. It should have been 3 days. That's what air power will do for you. German Tiger tank. Great tank. Doesn't do you any good if you can't get it into battle. Let's compare the English Channel to the French countryside. Napoleon, Hitler, they couldn't cross the English Channel. We crossed it with ease because we were unopposed by the Luftwaffe or the Kriegsmarine, the German Navy. It was harder for the Germans to move men, material, and tanks across the French countryside than it was for us to cross the English Channel, again, because we owned the air. One of the things that made Eisenhower such a great man, he wrote this out before the invasion. If the invasion had failed, this is what it would have said. Our landings in the Cherbourg Havre area have failed to gain a satisfactory foothold, and I have withdrawn the troops. My decision to attack at this time and place was based on the best information available. The troops, the air, and the Navy did all that bravery and devotion to duty could do. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone. Leadership. Results of the day, our armies are ashore. In less than a year, the war is going to be over. If we didn't land, the Russian armies are going to wind up in Western Europe. We're not going to meet them in Germany. We're going to meet them in France. Now, Operation Bagration, total combined casualties for that operation, for Overlord, was 130,000 killed. That's from 6 June to 21 July. That's both sides, 130,000 people. Well, Bagration, that operation, both sides lost 450,000 men. Put that into perspective. And I just have to share this. I found this out during my research. For every German soldier lost in every campaign that Germany fought in World War II, Poland, Low Countries, France, Battle of Britain, North Africa, Italy, D-Day, Battle of France, Battle of the Bulge, all of those campaigns compared to what Germany lost in Russia was 1 to 5. Germany lost 5 times as many soldiers just fighting in Russia as every other campaign of World War II. Russia is where the German army went to die. Admiral Ramsey, Royal Navy, we have yet to establish ourselves on land. The Navy has done its part well. News considered satisfactory throughout the day from the British beaches, and good progress was made. Very little news was received from the colonists, and anxiety persists as to the positions on shore. Still, on the whole, we have very much to thank God for this day. Gotta love these guys. Major John Howard, he was involved with the paratroopers. The Oxen Bucks is what they're called. They captured the Pegasus Bridge, a very key objective. When they handed the bridge over to the Warwickshire Regiment, because when the infantry got in from the beaches, one of Howard's men said he found it hard to leave. You see, we had been there a full day and night. We rather felt this was a bit of our territory. A little bit longer, Sergeant John Ellery, 16th Regiment, 1st Division, Easy Red Sector, Omaha Beach. This is a guy who went through some nasty stuff. Spent the night in a ditch, wrapped in a hedgerow, wrapped in a damp shelter half, thoroughly exhausted. But I felt elated. I'd been through the greatest experience of my life. I was 10 feet tall. No matter what happened, I had made it off the beach and reached the high ground. I was king of the hill, at least in my own mind, for a moment. My contribution to the heroic tradition of the United States Army might have been the smallest achievement in the history of courage, but at least for a time, I had walked in the company of very brave men. You all see Band of Brothers on HBO a few years ago? That's Lieutenant Dick Winters in the middle there. That's their C-47 getting ready for the night of nights. Basically midnight, the morning of D-Day, Winters is on a C-47 heading behind enemy lines and praying that he makes it through the day. Of course, he wins the Distinguished Service Cross in the morning. At midnight, he gets on his knees, thanks God for getting him through the day, made a promise to himself if he survived the war, he would find a quiet farm and spend the rest of his life in peace and quiet. And he kept his promise. Thank you.